Hello, everyone. Welcome to another MLB Prospects Deep Dive. I'm Carlos Collazo, joined by JJ Cooper today to talk about the Rays system annually, a very strong system for the Rays. JJ, it seems like this year that was no different. But I do have to ask you, how difficult was it to put together and line up this system? Because there are a number of players that it feels like are in a pretty similar tier inside this top 10. There are a number of players on the Rays list that we have in a similar range on our top 100 list. If you guys haven't seen that yet, it is up and live at baseballamerica.com. Definitely check that out. But I kind of envy you, JJ, because this is a very talented system. But I'm also kind of glad I didn't have to be the one to make these decisions. Tell me a little bit about the process and how close this group of top tens really are.
We'll get into talking about number one. Good to be with you as always, Carlos. But we'll get into number one in a minute. But Carson Williams at number one, that was easy. After that, nothing was easy. Because if someone wants to yell at me about my rankings and say, I don't know why so-and-so is at 2, and if you wanted to say, but you have Aiden Smith outside the top 10, you have Brody Hopkins outside the top 10, I think that Aiden Smith and Brody Hopkins are right in the same range as pretty much everyone at 2, 3, 4, 5 on this list. When you talk about Braden Taylor and you talk about Trey Morgan and Xavier Isaac, and we could just go down the list, Braylor Guerrero, there's so many different kinds of prospects here, but there are probably 12 or 13 top 100 plausible players here, is what I would say. And I've kind of went a little bit more. I've kind of waxed and waned over the years. I've often been I've always been crazy about velo. I'm always going to take pitchers. I really do believe that velocity gives you options that a great soft tossing command artist doesn't have. But I would also say, like, one thing I've been doing lately more, and as I talk to people again, because these aren't just my rankings, we talk these through. But I also, when we talked these through before we did the handbook, I kind of said, I don't want to kind of lock anyone in on things that we don't want for the top 100, but here's my thought process on it. And the thing I would say with that is I did go with a little bit more with the guys who I think are more plausible, are safer big league regulars who are really pretty close over guys who might have higher ceilings but have a lot more ways that they could get derailed. And that maybe kind of like explains here, like when we talk about like comparing some of these guys, I would say the guys after Carson Williams who fits, I mean, Carson Williams kind of fits that safe upper level guy too. We can talk about the hit tool and we will, but like you're talking about the defense, you're talking about the power, you're talking about double A performance, all that. There's a lot of guys on this list. You could kind of say, okay, if I want to go all upside, you could flip a lot of these rankings because when you talk about an Aiden Smith, when you talk about a Brody Hopkins, who's a college draftee, but Brody Hopkins is an exceptional athlete who had a really impressive 2020, 2024, acquired from the Mariners. But he does have reliever risk. He also doesn't have a very long track record of durability. He has to improve his control, things like that are like, okay, these could derail him, or he could be the best of this group. We look at those pitchers who are on this list. We look at the Trevor Harrisons, the Gary Gill Hills, the Santiago Suarez's. These guys all are really talented, all have done some things already, but again, there's a difference between guys doing it in Class A and doing it in Double A or Triple A, and so they got a little further to go. It's the thing I would say that the Rays did here that's really impressive is, or, and again, if you want to quibble about it and say maybe they should have gone for it last year, they are one of the teams that did decide to sell at the deadline, and they really did clean up. I mean, when you look at some of the moves they made, they added, I would say that this farm system kind of hit by Rays standards, kind of a rough spot over the last couple of years. They did have a junior Caminero. They did have, guys like Curtis Meadnall who faced defensive questions, but the bat should be solid. They had guys like that, but they didn't have a whole lot of pitching. They really haven't had a whole lot of starting pitching, especially once Taj Bradley graduated. They had Shane Boss coming back from injury, but he'd already been in the big leagues. But you look kind of up and down the Mason Montgomerys and all the world kind of were always probably going to be relievers. That's where he is now. Guys like that, they didn't have a whole lot of young, developing starting pitching that you could point to and say, these are guys who look like they could be rotation stalwarts. They didn't have a whole lot of kind of high upside guys. And then this kind of flipped now. Like you look at it now, and I do think as compared to kind of that last wave of Rays prospects, there was a number of guys in that last wave of Rays prospects who kind of fit the, and we liked on. I mean, like in hindsight, maybe we were too high on Vidal Brujan. Maybe we weren't too high on Xavier Edwards. Maybe they were too low on him because he went off and had a really good year with the Marlins. But Curtis Mead, the question is always where he can't really throw. So how is he going to fit defensively? Jonathan Aranda, where is he going to fit defensively? Austin Shenton, where is he going to fit defensively? They had a lot of guys like that. Now you have guys who you don't have a question where Carson Williams is going to fit defensively. You don't have a question about whether Braden Taylor is going to be a solid defender in the infield. You don't have a question of where Trey Morgan is going to fit defensively. He may be the best defensive first baseman in baseball right now. You have guys like that. That's a different kind of path of prospect, I would say, than what they've had. And it makes for a very interesting and very difficult to line up top 10 and top 30, to be honest.
Yeah, let's get into some of these players in a little bit more, in some more specifics here, because what also stands out, and you mentioned this briefly at the start of your chat there, is there are a lot of profiles that are fairly extreme here. You mentioned Braden Taylor. He's almost like the most fun, boring player on our top 100 because there's nothing he does at an exceptional level, but it seems to be that he does everything really well. There's no glaring weakness. You've got a guy like Trey Morgan, who is just such an unusual first base profile. You've got a first baseman right behind him in Xavier Isaac, who's maybe a more traditional first base profile, but he's got a lot of power and some real swing and miss questions. Then you go further down the list, and it's Chandler Simpson, who, again, is a very polarizing profile. He does some things exceptionally well. He has some real question marks. So I guess specifically with the hitters, how are you thinking through guys like Taylor and Morgan and Isaac and Simpson? What do you expect them to turn into at the major league level? Are these impact players, a chance to be impact players, or are these more steady Eddie guys? And I guess what's just your conviction in this like hitting pool beyond Carson Williams? We will get into Carson Williams at some point.
So let's start with Taylor, right? I think that Braden Taylor is the kind of guy who it's really easy to kind of underrate, because you could really say with him, if you want to focus on tools, I could piece together from the top 10, kind of using the exercise you guys did with the draft recently. Like if you took all the tools from different guys and put them together, I don't know if Braden Taylor actually has the best of any tool in the, in the Rays top 10. As a hitter, I know people are going to I think that there are multiple hitters here who might be a better pure hitter. I think Chandler Simpson's hit tool gets really underrated. I know we'll get to that. Trey Morgan's hit tool is pretty good too. Power, Xavier Isaac's got more power. Carson Williams has more power. Okay. Defense, Carson Williams is a better defender. I mean, shortstop. Taylor's a second baseman, third baseman, and Williams is a better defender at short than Taylor is at second or third, I would say. Nothing against there. Arm, Carson Williams has a cannon of an arm. On base ability, I would say that he may not have the best on base ability here. Don't we even talk about skills, right? But then if you get to it, like I feel like, it's like, well, then JJ, why did you rank him so high? Because then if you said though, okay, well, what about hitting ability? Braden Taylor's in the top 3 of that group though. I could argue him maybe 2. Because again, I like Chandler Simpson's hit tool, but Simpson's hit tool is a very unconventional hit tool, which is when you get to the big leagues where range is, positioning's best, it's going to be, range is the best it's going to be, arms are the best you're going to see. Does a guy who can't hit the ball over the outfielder regularly, does some of that kind of go away as they kind of move the infield to the right spots? They move the outfielders to the right spots. Does it become harder to kind of sneak those balls through? Braden Taylor's a very conventional above average hitter, I would say. When it comes to power, I don't think that he's going to be a 30-plus home run guy. But at the same time, I think that he absolutely could be a 15 to 20 to 25. He's among the best of the Rays guys when you talk about his ability to get to that power too, because I think he's going to put together good at bats and all that. Talk about his defense. I think he's going to be an above average defender at second or third potentially. And if you look at all the guys, Trey Morgan's a better defender than him, but Trey Morgan's a first baseman. if you're looking at it and say, would you rather have I think Taylor's a 55, maybe a 6, if it all works out right at second or third. Would you rather have a six at third or an 8 at first? I think teams would debate that a lot. That'd be an interesting debate. Again, arm's fine, not strongest arm, but it's better than multiple other arms on this, top 10. Running, he's not Chandler Simpson. He's not Trey Morgan to that extent, but at the same time, he runs well. He's a good base runner. There's just so many things that Braden gets on base. There's so many things that Braden Taylor does relatively well that it's kind of hard not to picture him as being that kind of guy who you look back on and say, oh, he played, he had 5, 6, 7 years as a big league regular. And I don't know if he ever made an all-star game, but at the same time, maybe he did once because, his perfect first 2 months happened, but you just look back on it and say, oh, that was a 15, 20 WAR career player. And those are hard to find. As I often find when I'm dealing with, talking to readers and all, sometimes I think it gets underrated how hard that is to find. As we just dealt with a YouTube comment that said that Chris Bryant was a bad pick because he was done before he hit free agency. And it's like, if you win Rookie of the Year and MVP and lead your team to a World Series title, you're the second best player in your draft, you're really good. But what I'm saying is Taylor is kind of that boringly good, but boringly good is something that can easily be underrated.
Yeah, I think people do tend to just underestimate how valuable having an average big leaguer is. If you're an average big leaguer for 10 years in almost any given draft, that's like a top 15 type of result from the draft. So it's not the sexiest profile, but to your point, there's no clear glaring weakness. He does a lot of things well.
Yeah, can I just ask you with that? Like when you say that, like I think that people think like we can see this comment on multiple things. Like the Reds, again, I'm just going things that we dealt with this offseason. The Reds traded for Gavin Lux, and it was like, oh, they just got a 2 to 2.5 WAR player. Why would they do that? And it's like, do you know how few 2.5 WAR players the Reds have had in their lineup over the last 5 years? Like, I do think that there is this. You just did. I want to kick it back to you. You just did these redrafts for the 2020 and the 2010 draft. And I think in people's minds, they think of it as like, oh, so that draft probably produced what? 20 guys who had 3 WAR seasons? That's not the case, is it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is really instructive just to go back, and really the further you go back, the better. We've done some 2020, 2019 redrafts, so there's still a lot of room for these players to make themselves better moving forward. You got to project a little bit. For the 2010 redraft, there are like 4 or 5 players at the very top who are like fringe Hall of Fame types. It's a really good draft at the top. And then once you get to 15, you're really looking at role players. You're looking at players that had a couple peak seasons, a couple all-star seasons. And then after that, they're just kind of, 1 to 2 win players. So I do think it just because you're a first rounder does not mean you are a perennial 10-time all-star type. Those players are very rare for a reason. And I think, just maybe underrating the everyday regular is something that we could try and avoid.
Brandon, again, if you said from a Rays perspective, like Brandon Lau has been a great pick by the Rays. And Brandon Lau has had his best seasons. He's had some injury-plagued seasons. But like you're going to look back on it, and Brandon Lau is one of the 50 best Rays of all time. I mean, obviously the Rays don't have the Yankees history. They haven't been around as long. But I'm probably underselling him. He's probably one of the 25 best Rays of all time. Like, and Brandon Lau isn't like a perennial all-star or anything, but he is a guy who can play multiple positions, has real power, has proven to be a solid defender in the infield. Like enough things where you're like, wow. Like if I'm saying like they're going to be different kind of players, but I kind of I wouldn't be surprised at all if Braden Taylor kind of stepped in as Brandon Lau exited stage right for the Rays. And if that's the case, and he has a Brandon Lau career, that would be a great outcome for both Taylor and the Rays.
Absolutely. Yeah, JJ, I'm curious about these first basemen because they're so interesting just in general. The fact that they're back to back is a lot of fun. So give me like maybe the steel man or the best case and worst case outcomes for Trey Morgan and Xavier Isaac. Isaac is this much more traditional first baseman with a ton of power. He does have missed questions. And then we talked about it a little bit already, but I am curious to see how you're thinking about Trey Morgan because it's just so unusual. I don't even know if we know how to rate players like Morgan because he's an absolute unicorn. So just talk me through the thought process with ranking them, what you're hearing from the industry. How do we value an 80 defender at first who maybe doesn't have the typical power for that position in a game that's becoming increasingly more athletic?
The first thing I'll say is okay, so let's just kind of grant that Trey Morgan is an exceptional defender at first. But now let's almost kind of put that to the side, because I think that's the part that really complicates this and becomes like, okay, how much do you value that? I saw that Vinny Pasquantino recently made a comment like, oh, everyone's underrating first base. We're involved in like handling almost all plays. And there's a truth to that. But at the same time, that's like giving a catcher credit for the fact that the ball, like if you don't have a catcher behind home plate, the ball's going to roll to the backstop every time. Like, because what I mean by that is that I value first base defense. I think that it's important, but the vast majority of these plays are ones that everyone makes, right? There's no such thing as the major league first baseman who has on target throws to first base and they just clang off the glove, right? Like the vast majority of plays every first baseman makes, especially ground ball to shortstop, throw. And again, now there's that area that a Trey Morgan can make an impact where it's like, okay, throw is in the dirt, he scoops it. But I would say Trey Morgan's more, his impact is to compare him, watching him and Kyle Manzardo, former Ray, now Guardian. Manzardo's range is his issue, right? Like he'll field the ball hit right to him, but you're just not going to get much to the left or to the right. Trey Morgan kind of allows you to do things a little differently as far as your second baseman, as far as your positioning, because he can play it more like a second base shortstop type who gives you that ability to make plays that otherwise aren't going to be made, to cut down that double down the line because he makes a play someone else does, to throw, to make that throw to cut down a guy at second or third who most first basemen are just going to, nope, I'm not even trying that. He can do that. But now let's take that to the side, because that by itself doesn't make him a top 10 prospect. I don't care, how good you are defensively. There is no such thing as a first baseman in the big leagues. Like, yeah, can't hit, but he's the Martin Maldonado of first baseman. Yeah, it's a $180, but man, he saves us a lot of runs at first. Doesn't exist, right? The reason Trey Morgan's where he is even if you take that part out, this is a guy who's a 325 career minor league hitter who makes a ton of contact. And he's a batting average and on base and some athleticism, some ability to go first to third, swipe a base, all that. The kind of the yeah, but is this is the guy I think his career high going to LSU and pro ball is in the season is 10 home runs. Obviously, that's not profile power at first base. But the thing I would also say with that nowadays is this is one of the things that we're kind of studying and looking at and kind of examining is first base is not basically the land of thumpers that it used to be. If you look at shortstop production and first base production over the 21st century, it used to be that first base production was here and shortstop offensive production was here. And now it's kind of met because shortstops are way better. The shortstops are really, in many cases now, just the best, not just the best athlete, not just the best, most impactful defender. They're just the best player on the field for a team, right? We're seeing that with it's not just Bobby Witt Jr., okay, who fits that perfect profile, but Francisco Lindor and Gunnar Henderson and Corey Seager. And we could just go down the line of these teams where it's like, who's their best player? He plays short. Okay, now we say, who are the best first basemen in baseball? It's a much shorter list. You would actually say, like, if you said just who's the 15th best shortstop in baseball, that's still a really good player. 15th best first baseman in baseball is not on that same tier. So I would say, like, in this world, I'm kind of interested to see. Again, I'm not saying I have every answer here, but I am interested to see if a guy like Trey Morgan, who really does kind of, you said, well, what does that look like? Kind of looks like Yandy Diaz, to be honest. Like, the Rays have had a non-profile first baseman here. I know Yandy Diaz has gotten to more power as he's kind of matured, but Yandy Diaz has always been the master of the extremely hard hit ground ball, right? And so he's been a guy who's much more likely to battle for, to hit 300 than he is to hit 30 homers. Trey Morgan is another guy who could be that. You flip that to Xavier Isaac. Xavier Isaac's much more of your profile, right, of what you're looking for, which is until Xavier Isaac basically hit Double-A, what you were seeing was big power, ability to get on base, solid ability to make contact. And by the way, sneaky athleticism. He's gotten better as an athlete as a pro, not worse, which is always good to see. Now we have the but with Xavier Isaac, which is as he's gotten to more of that power, I would say, like, again, there's always these kind of trade-offs you can make as a hitter, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And, you and I've had this discussion multiple times, but like, if you said this guy's a 50 hitter with 50 power, and I said, no, I think he's going to be a 40 hitter with 60 power, that's something we're really could be describing the same player, just a matter of what he decides, what he and his team decide his approach is going to be. You can trade off contact ability for power. You can trade off power for contact ability. The balance probably got a little bit out of whack for Xavier Isaac last year, I would say. Like, he was doing things to try to get more of that power. The swing got a little bigger, kind of the step got a little bigger, but the balance shifted too far, I would say. You don't want to be running close to 40% strikeout rates. And so that is why you would say, again, he's one of those guys who you're like, if you want to say Xavier Isaac's number 2 on your personal top 10 for the Rays, I get it. The reason he's not on the list we put out is because the to-do list is he's got to make more contact, because if he doesn't, the way he played last year does not play in the major leagues. It won't be a productive big leaguer. He's young. He has plenty of time to improve, refine, develop, but that's but with him.
All right, well, that's pretty fascinating, JJ. We're going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to get into the top prospect in the system, Carson Williams. And we are back. JJ, let's break down the top prospect in the system, Carson Williams, one of the very best shortstops in the game at this point, maybe one of the best defenders in the game at the position, and he's also got a ton of power. So you're talking about maybe a 70 defender at one of the most premium positions, and a guy who's going to hit a lot of home runs. How far up a top 100 list could you argue a player like Carson Williams for us right now? He's right kind of on the fringe of the top 10. And yeah, let's just get into the profile more. How exciting is he? What are you expecting him at the major league level? What does he still need to improve? Because it does seem like there are some clear weaknesses and clear strengths with him.
I don't think, like, it's funny. We got a subscriber chat as we're recording this that's going to go live, and one of the questions on that is wouldn't you just put Carson Williams ahead of Taylor Walls right now? And we'll probably actually do that in a mailbag issue of this, so I won't go fully into that. But there's still a to-do list here, and he is a top 10 kind of fringe top 10 prospect for us. But I would say on a deeper top 25, he kind of fits more as like a number 15 to 20 ideally. And that's because if you think of a top 10 shortstop prospect, I think that normally you would say with that, like, you're a pretty close to finished product, well-rounded guy. Carson Williams may get there. He's not there yet. Like, the hit tool is still kind of the question. And I don't mean as in like he's going to hit a $180, but like there's obviously a big difference if Carson Williams ends up being a 240, 250 hitter with power and great defense versus the 210, 220 hitter. Make the on-base percentage adjustments correspondingly to that. And I would say with that is the Rays kind of, when you talk to Rays officials about him, they kind of acknowledge like, hey, this is a guy who, you got to remember, it wasn't until his senior year of high school, you'll remember this better than I do, but that's when he kind of flipped from, look at this arm, who's a really interesting pitcher, to no, this guy's a legitimate position player prospect, and that's what he prefers to do. Like, this is not your typical SoCal, like, when we talk about Marcelo Meyer, also in the top 25. When Marcelo Meyer was a high school freshman, he was the dude. Like, he was a standout. You're like, wow, just wait till you see this guy. Marcelo Meyer, by the time he was a senior, you had seen him do everything you wanted to do as a high school senior. Mm-hmm. When you talk about a Jordan Lawler, when you talk about a Royce Lewis, who I remember I've got video of Royce Lewis as a high school sophomore, and he was already a dude on a really stacked team. Guys like that, like you would say, like, okay, we have this track record that is a mile long. These are extremely polished, well-refined guys. That wasn't Carson Williams. Carson Williams was a guy who kind of wasn't as much of a showcase guy, was a pitcher slash shortstop who really kind of made strides as a hitter. And even now, I would say his ability, his aptitude has kind of allowed him to kind of reach double A, where like I'd still say that there are some swing refinements to come. There's still some swing decision improvements to come or that need to come. But he's just been so good at everything that he's yet to reach the level to kind of have that lesson taught to him. I do think that the Rays would like to see him get a very long runway in AAA with Durham. Like, let him refine these skills, these tools in a way before you reach the majors. That's kind of the Rays way. Let's be honest with this. Like, the Rays are not an organization that in general is like good couple weeks. If the Angels are a good couple weeks in AA, up you go. The Rays are yeah, you've done it. Yeah, you're doing it in AAA, and let's see you do it for another month, and then the Rays want you when you arrive to be ready to play and never go back and be as finished so that you're making an impact from day one in the big leagues. Carson Williams, I don't feel like, is at that point where they look at it and say he's ready to make that impact. I think that by 26 he is, and that's kind of the hope is the vast majority of 25 at AAA. Let him kind of improve the hit tool. Let him face a different type of pitcher than he's really faced a lot of in the past. And then once that happens, then say, okay, now it's time to fill what, let's be clear, is a pretty significant hole. Taylor Walls, fine defensively. The back concerns that he always faced in the minors have kind of been true. And I would say, like, if you're looking at long term, it's like, okay, you've got Caminero. Can he play third? You got Williams to slot in at short. And then again, Taylor, Caminero can't play third, slides over to a corner outfielder first. But you could do that. But Taylor could also be the second baseman. That's a really good young infield for years to come.
Yeah, so here's what I think about Williams. He has the obvious hit tool question mark, and he is around a 30% career strikeout rate in the minor leagues. But I also look up, and in 2022, as a 19-year-old, he hit 19 homers. He had 28 stolen bases. In 2023, across a few levels, he had 23 home runs. He had 20 stolen bases. In 2024, there's 20 home runs, 33 stolen bases. So is there a world where, because of the power, because of the speed, because of the defense, the profile, and you also look up, he's run a 10% plus walk rate his entire career in the minors. So is it possible that with no improvements in the hit tool, he's going to have a low batting average, but he does so many other things so well that he still has above average impact, major league level tools? Is this the type of player?
No, he's a high floor guy in some ways. He's a high floor guy with a near 30% strikeout rate.
Yeah.
And that's because I would struggle to explain a way where he's not a better Taylor Walls. Taylor Walls is an everyday big league shortstop for the Rays. Like, obviously, let's just acknowledge that if Wander Franco is not arrested and facing charges, Taylor Walls is not the Rays' everyday shortstop. It's Wander Franco. But with this being the case, Taylor Walls has been their everyday shortstop, and Carson Williams has the chance to be similar to Walls defensively, because Walls was really good coming up in the minors. And I would say with Williams does a little differently. Williams' defense, when you say, why is it so good? I love looking at shortstops play defense in the minors. I really do. And you see them do it different ways, right? And what I would say of Carson Williams is one of those guys. He's athletic, he's rangy, but when you have an arm like him, it just kind of opens up a level of things that most guys can't do, right? You can make that play that most guys can't make because you're going towards third base, you field it. Most guys, if they try, they're going to throw across their body. It's going to bounce 3 times. And the best case scenario is I would describe it as a gallant try safe, right? Where it's like he throws it over, if it's not a 10 runner, he beats it out by 2 steps, and you go, oh, that was a good play by the shortstop. Didn't mean it did anything, but it was fine. Some of those guys just know they just put the ball in their pocket because they're not going to throw it away. Carson Williams is the guy who can make that throw and nab that guy by a half step where you go, oh, like Carson Williams is the kind of guy that Chandler Simpson doesn't want to be playing shortstop, because where Chandler Simpson knows, if I hit the ball on the ground and it's 3 steps to the shortstop's right, I'm going to beat that guy out. Carson Williams is one of the guys who could maybe throw him out because of that arm. So he has that defense, and then he has power. Like, I don't think no one really questions that this is the guy who, even if he's striking out a lot, he's going to run into doubles and homers. And yes, that's going to be enough. I mean, that kind of gets you to go back to our Braden Taylor's boring good. That could get Carson Williams to an ugly 3 to 4 win type player, right? Where you're like, really? 4 WAR, he hit 210. And you're like, yes, 4 WAR because he was one of the best defenders, and he hit 25 home runs, and he, had doubles, and he drew walks, all these other things where it's like, it's not maybe as aesthetically pleasing as you want, but he gets to that. Now, the difference is when you look at his age, when you look at when you say like that, you don't think of him as a finished product. You don't think of him as polished as maybe some of his contemporaries coming from even the same area as Carson Williams. Well, then that's where you can get really excited about him, because if you're comparing him to like a Marcelo Meyer, who's in a similar range on the top 100, you could say Carson Williams may have more room to grow, is what I would say. Because again, I don't want to make it sound like that. Don't treat him like Brandon Nimmo coming out of, an area where there hasn't been a draft pick in the last 50 years. And when you go, oh, Brandon Nimmo really kind of was a slower developer who kind of turned into an above average regular. And you're like, well, why did that happen? It's like, because he came from an area where he never saw probably 85, in a game when he was playing around his area, if he wasn't on the road in a showcase or something. Carson Williams is not that, but Carson Williams does have a little bit more, I would say, development than most guys in his age and background.
Is there a specific area of the pure hitting ability that the Rays are going to try to improve to cut down on the strikeouts? Is there a swing change to be made? Is there an approach change? Is there a specific pitch type that he's struggled with? What would be like the area that you feel like there's still some room where he can maybe improve a little bit? Where's the hope for the strikeout rate beyond maybe just he's got more development to do than a typical player his age?
I think approach and recognition at some point, especially approach, maybe. Like, I don't think he always puts together the at bat where you go, wow. Like, if you're comparing his at bat to say like a Trey Morgan or even a Chandler Simpson at bat, they're in the same lineup. You would see with them like, okay, I see what they're doing to the pitcher. I see what the pitcher's trying to do with them. Carson Williams is a little bit, it's not that level of, it's kind of more like batting 2-0 run rather than batting 4-0-1, I would say at this point. Not that he hasn't made improvements already at some point, which is kind of what has allowed him to already have success up to AA. But I do think that there's more there to be had.
Nice. Okay. Well, Carson Williams, very, very exciting prospect at the top. JJ, the last thing I kind of want to ask you about, and we can go into whatever other topics you might want to, but the Rays seem to perennially have a very strong farm system. We have them ranked as a top 10 organization in the game on this year's 2025 list in our prospect handbook this year. Going back to 2018, they have ranked as a top 10 system in the game. It's basically them and the Dodgers that are in that category. And they also, it's not like they've been picking at the very top of the draft. In 2017, they picked 4th overall, but from 2018 on, they've been picking in the second half of the first round or later. We know that the Rays are a good team when it comes to trading and just making savvy moves. Does that explain why they are seemingly always one of our top farm systems? Why are they so good at just having a loaded system?
I would point to 2 things. And if you wanted to use this as a strength and a weakness, you can. The Rays are never going to be a team that takes all their chips and pushes them all in and says, this is the year. That is not them. It never has been. You could say that the Rays are much more willing to make a move that says, this will be a half step back now to take 3 steps forward in a year or two. They're willing to make that over and over. They are one of those teams. I think one of their, let's be honest, the market that they are in is not something, I don't think it would be possible. They would not operate the same way if they were in New York. You can look at Andrew Friedman in LA, and you say okay, he's come from the Rays approach, but now he's in LA and he's like, I'm going to spin on everyone because I'm the Dodgers. But I also don't think the Rays approach as it would work in a different media market. If you were in New York or Boston or Philly and you're like, last year at the deadline, you said, we're on the very fringe of the playoff race. So what we're going to do is we're going to trade away Zach Eflin, and we're going to trade away our best relievers, and we're going to trade away multiple veterans, because while it may cost us a win, 2 or 3 wins this year, we think it'll gain us 5, 10, or 15 wins down the road. A lot of teams don't. That's not their approach, right? We can't do that. We're not looking. The Phillies, I would say, are an example of this. The Phillies are always, in this world they're in right now, it's about how do we win the World Series this year. The Rays approach is let's always widen the window. Let's be honest, if you sign an extension with the Rays, which many of their players do, at some point that probably means that you're being traded by the Rays so that they can move in your replacement. Because by doing so, you've essentially now become more of a trade asset, because 4 or 5 years down the road, as salaries continue to rise, you become, a bargain for a veteran. You're not facing arbitration. They know how much they're going to pay you. That's a trade asset. They do that a lot. The other part I would say about it, though, is they are really good at development. And I would say also they're relatively fearless. They are one of the organizations, I'd say more than almost anyone, there are organizations who kind of are known that they're not going to make a ton of trades. And when they do make trades, it's going to be something very straightforward. We need a shortstop. You need a starter. We've got a starter. You've got a shortstop. We'll make that trade. The Rays will listen, I feel like, on anyone at any time. And if they think that the trade is in their favor, there's no one who they won't consider in a move. And they're not really, again, they're one of those teams, I would say, that very much looks at it and says, we'll take a little bit of short-term heat if we think it makes us better in the long term. And so that does kind of lead to season. If you look at their farm system out, they're right. Their farm system has been very good. Hasn't all worked out, but again, I would look back at a couple of years ago and say they had the number 1 prospect in baseball, and then they basically had that guy locked up long term, and then that player is facing charges. That's kind of one of those things you don't really prep for, and that kind of took them multiple steps back, I would say, on the field. Even not talking about the off the field ramifications, but on the field. But if you look at this last year, it's hard to not be impressed with just how much depth they added to this system. I mean, I talked about the Mariners trade where you add a Hopkins, you add an Aiden Smith. You talk about the Padres trade. They're really excited about Homer Bush Jr., and they think that he's going to have a much better 25 than 24. They really kind of worked with his swing. They think he's going to be able to tap into his athleticism more. You look at the Orioles trades, and you look at what a Jackson Baumeister might be for them in another year. You look at a Matthew Edsel. You look at a Mac Horvath they got. There's just so much talent that they added where, again, usually when you're doing a top 30 list, you get to the back of that list and it's not like we never run out of names. I've never had a 30. I did the Angels a couple of years where it's I know that this guy's not much of a prospect, but it's not hard to write him up. It's here's the path to being a reliever or whatever. But it's not often that you write up a 30 and you're sitting there at 30 and you're like, why? I want to put another 5 or 6 or 7 guys in here. We didn't get a chance to talk about, I'll end it with these 2 guys who are in the top 10 that I think are worth talking about. you could argue Braylor Guerrero behind all those guys we just talked about, right? He's barely played. He has yet to play full season ball. But when you talk to scouts, you talk to front office officials who've seen Braylor Guerrero play, they're like, this guy has star potential. We just want to see him healthy. That's the guy they have. I'll end it. I think you could probably guess where this was going to go, which is I've always been fascinated with Chandler Simpson. And I will say that I'm fascinated with Chandler Simpson. I keep saying this, so I'll keep saying it. He gets placed in that bucket of players who don't really fit in the bucket you're talking about with him. He will be compared. I promise you, the day he comes to the majors, understandably, it'll be, oh, he's the first to steal 100 bases in a season since Billy Hamilton did it when Billy Hamilton stole 155. Delano Shields Jr. also stole 104 that year. So he was one of two that year. But since Billy Hamilton stole 155. And like Billy Hamilton, this guy's a massive speedster, da-da-da-da-da. All true. But as I'll keep just repeating until people start registering it, Chandler Simpson was Division I batting champ. That's something you don't do if you can't hit. Okay, great. He did it at Georgia Tech. Good for him. Chandler Simpson was last year's minor league batting champ. Now, you don't do that if you can't hit. He does hit differently. But if you watch, and I think I did watch every ball that Chandler Simpson put in play last year because I'm sick. I will admit it. I will just admit it. But if you watch him, usually with a player of his profile with no power, okay, I'm going to bust him in with power. Let's see if he can handle it. Double down the line. He can handle velocity on his hands. Not a lot of guys with his kind of approach can. Okay, he can handle a ball in and up on him. Let's go away. Chandler Simpson's eyes get, bulge out of his head at that point because there is nothing he's better at than just slapping that ball. He's a left-handed hitter that slaps that ball between between shortstop and third base. And a lot of times it gets through. But if it doesn't really matter. If you're making that play in the hole, just put the ball in your pocket. And then, by the way, when he gets to first base at that point, just accept that he's going to be standing on second before long. I was at the St. Louis Baseball Writers Association of America, BBWA, awards dinner last weekend as we record this. And one of the things they had was a round table with members of the 85 Cardinals, and Vince Coleman was one of them. And Vince Coleman basically was talking about how Whitey Herzog, when he came up, basically said you had the full green light, and he kind of expected him to be standing on second anytime he got to first. That's kind of what Chandler Simpson, I'm not saying he's going to do it at that level in the major leagues, but there's not a whole lot you can do when Chandler Simpson wants to steal, especially in the current rules where, okay, you're going to be able to throw over, twice, and now you better not throw over again. The rules are set up where Chandler Simpson should steal a ton of bases and do it at a rate where it's like, no, this is adding. This isn't kind of where it was in the Vince Coleman days where it's like he stole 110 bags, but he also was thrown out 36 times. And if you really work it out, it really was not, all that advantageous except for the pressure it put on teams and all that. Chandler Simpson should be doing that at like stealing a ton of bags at like an 80+% rate. And by the way, if he's standing on second, any ball that drops in the outfield, he's touching home. You have that on top of it. He's a Billy Hamilton type of speedster, but with hitting ability. Now, and I'll end it with this, the remaining to do, why is he not higher on this list then? Why is he not a top 100 prospect? What we're going to be looking at in 2025 is he's still relatively new to the outfield. What you just really want to see is can he be an above average defender with that speed? Can his routes, can his reads get to the point, where ideally you would love to see plus, but it's a big jump for him to get to plus. But if he could just be above average out there, then all of a sudden this really fits. He can't be a 40. He can't be a 45. He's got to be an average or above average. It's the Rays. The Rays don't play below average defenders in the outfield, and especially they don't center. Their center fielders are 70s. Their corner outfielders are 55s in center who are 70s in the corner often. So that's what we'll have to watch. But if he can do that, if his defense can get better, watch out.
Well, we appreciate the deep dive into the Rays. JJ, if you guys liked this podcast, we're going to have farm system deep dives on every team in baseball. We've got a handful up on the YouTube channel right now. If you want to watch those, definitely go check out the Baseball America YouTube channel. We've been a lot more active in that area. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up with all of the content we have coming. Same for the podcast on whatever podcast app you're listening to. Subscribe, give us a like there, give us a review. That would be greatly appreciated. And then just to all of our Baseball America subscribers, we always say this, we could not do this without you guys. We really appreciate the support. The Prospect Handbook should be coming out to people who have bought it in the near future. JJ, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add, but thank you for the
I'm
Rays
just going
deep
to add
dive.
to that. If you're listening to this, if you buy a Baseball America Prospect Handbook from us, we're shipping the print copies soon, before long. But if you order it from us, I will be sending you a copy of it, a digital version, the next business day. Like, so if you're listening to this and you're like, I want to read about all 30 Rays prospects in the top 30, it'll be go to baseballamerica.com, click on the shop, order. And if you order a print version, I'll send you a digital, or you can just order the digital. But either one you do, that's being sent now. You don't have to wait. If you're listening to this, you can have it in your hands. Again, it's not automated. You will have it in your hands within a business day, because literally our customer service team will get it that you bought it, and they'll send it to me, and then I will send you a copy. So check that out, baseballamerica.com.
Yeah, so thank you guys. Really appreciate you listening. Really appreciate the support. For JJ, I'm Carlos. We'll see you guys next time.